Hey students. Okay, so for this analysis, it's going to be a little bit different because I'm the author. So I'm actually just going to tell you some of the things I was thinking about as I wrote the opening to Oceans Bright and Wide. I'll note this story is the first in my book, Bodies in Motion, and I was really using it to kind of try and give a lot of cultural background around Sri Lanka, which is where I was born, to readers to help place them so that they would be able to make sense of the rest of the stories in the book. So that's why I tried to embed a fair bit of colonial history into this story. But for this analysis, we're actually just going to look at the first paragraph. And I'm going to start now by reading it out loud to you. So relax, enjoy. Selvin stood just outside the convent gates, waiting for Sister Catherine to come and meet him. Bougainvillea spilled over the walls, lush and crimson. He was briefly tempted to break off a small sprig to present to her. He knew it was her favorite plant, the brilliantly hued, paper-thin leaves hiding their tiny white flowers. But any flowers he broke off would only wither and die. Better to leave them growing on the vines, surrounded by their own kind, beautiful in their profusion. Selvin watched the young girls instead, demure pairs walking in their crisp white school uniforms across the wide lawns. He heard the young nuns giving strict instructions to their charges. So that's the opening paragraph to the story. And there were a few things that I was trying to do with this. May or may not have succeeded. As a writer, you never know how much of what you are attempting is going to come across to the readers. I chose Bougainvillea to write about for a bunch of reasons, in part because it's the flower that I always associate with Sri Lanka. When I think about the summers we spent there as a kid visiting relatives, one of the images are these my family's houses, which were not particularly fancy homes in the village, were still stunningly beautiful because the simple walls were covered with flowers, with brilliant pink and orange bougainvillea. So, and as an immigrant, I try to grow it in my house, but it is difficult in Chicago because it's a tropical plant. So sometimes it blooms, sometimes it doesn't. I keep it in a pot. I have to take it out for the summer and bring it in for the winter. So even though I can keep it alive, it certainly is never going to thrive here the way it does in Sri Lanka. Since this story and many of the stories in the book are centered around immigration and traveling between Sri Lanka and the West, it seemed like a good piece of imagery and metaphor to use for that. So part of it is just about immigration. But then also the choice that Selvin is facing in this story is whether to let his brilliant young daughter go off to Oxford to study mathematics, right? So this line, maybe it's a little too on the nose, but I'm sort of hoping by the time the reader gets to that choice, they have mostly forgotten this concretely in the text, but it's just left an impression. Any flowers he broke off would only wither and die, right? So that's his fear for his daughter, that if she goes away, she'll suffer and she'll, might even die on the other side of the world. Better to leave them growing on the vines surrounded by their own kind, beautiful in their profusion, right? And so that's the same basic idea that he feels like she thrives being with her own kind. And then I connect it to the young girls, these pairs walking in the crisp white school uniforms. This paragraph also mentions that he's tempted to break off a little bit of the bougainvillea to give to Sister Catherine, which is really kind of inappropriate, right? Like for a parent, a married parent, to give a flower to one of the teachers, it's a little bit odd. So that also I was kind of wanting to put in a little note of uneasiness. And as the story develops and you realize that he has a little bit of a fantasy about this nun, I'm hoping you you feel that like there's something a little wrong here. There's something problematic in the way he thinks about her. Um, some of which would then becomes clear when she makes the comments that make him realize that she sees them as very different and not of the same kind. So that opening paragraph was trying to do a lot of work around thinking about commonalities and difference, who belongs together, who doesn't, um, what locations people can and cannot thrive in, whether whether it's okay to be in isolation rather than in a community of people like you. Um, it's just sort of setting up the fears and the tensions of the story. So that is an example of a close reading of one paragraph. I hope it helps. Okay,